introduce Brandie Nonnecke, who is going to be giving us an overview about state developments on governance and strategies and the tools that they're using. And she's the founding director of the Citrus Policy Lab at UC Berkeley and an associate professor of technology policy research at the Goldman School of Public Policy, where she directs the Tech Policy Initiative, a collaboration between Citrus and the Goldman School to strengthen tech policy education, research, and impact. And so thank you, Brandie. And she will speak for about an hour, and then we will have Margot Kaminsky do an amazing job to condense into 1 hour, 458 pages of the EU AI Act. So Brandie, take it away.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Good. All right. We're good to go now. So I'm actually on the Zoom here too, so that I can field any questions. So if you're watching on Zoom, I will see your questions come in. I wanted to do a pitch for our session tomorrow. Please check out our panel on state and local approaches to AI governance. You can see the esteemed speakers I'll be moderating tomorrow from 11:05 to 12:25. My intro has already been made, but one of the proudest hats I wear, I am the host of a podcast and video series called Tech Hype, where we debunk misunderstandings around emerging technologies and the laws and policies that shape them. There is so much hype about AI that it really clouds our ability to make those sound decisions, to draft responsible AI governance strategies. The most popular content by far are our TLDRs. What is TLDR? Too long, didn't read. Most of you in this room probably enjoy reading a bill or two. I would say the normal population doesn't. So I break down the laws and regulations governing emerging technologies. One of our most popular episode series was on SB 1047, which I'll get into more detail soon. A very controversial bill introduced in the California legislature. I had the honor of attending the Paris AI Action Summit, which was quite a whirlwind of discussions at the summit itself, and then it must have been hundreds of side events, and break down the 7 key takeaways from that event. Would love to have you all view that and see if you're in agreement or even disagreement on those 7 key takeaways. So oftentimes when we think of AI, what do you think of? Something like this? Skynet. And maybe this side of the room over there. What do you think of when we say AI? Her. Okay. Anything else? Yes? Terminator. This is a very dystopian group. Very. And I would say you're very much influenced by headlines, right? When we think about AI, we currently sort of project AI as all generative AI tools, like large language models, or we learned about earlier, large multimodal models. But it's really important that you understand not all AI is generative AI, and that there are currently more forms of simpler machine learning in use in both the public and private sectors that are making decisions that can affect your rights. But everybody's distracted by this shiny new marvel of machine learning. It's really important that we don't get distracted. And we have seen this at the state level. I'll talk about a few state strategies like executive orders. The state of California and the state of Washington, they both issued executive orders focused specifically on what type of AI? Generative AI. That makes me think they're suffering from a bit of FOMO, this fear of missing out. They're seeing this new technology. How do we harness this to make our operations more efficient, effective, or equitable? But like that parable, if you walk around with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, it won't work. Also, if you walk around with generative AI thinking that's the solution to all of your challenges, I guarantee you, it's not gonna work. So let's do some definitions here. So AI defined by computer science. Earlier in the technical session, you learned a lot, right, about the different forms of machine learning. Particular focus, I think, on generative AI tools. You can see here foundation models, those general purpose AI systems, the large language models, large multimodal models, maybe in the future the LMNOPs, right? We're going from LLMs, LMMs to LMNOPs. We'll see, and you can see how we have generative AI, deep learning, machine learning being the overarching. And there's different forms. There's supervised versus unsupervised. You heard the technical session talking about that. You can have interchanging between these. You can have reinforcement learning via human feedback, for example. How many of you in this room have seen half of these definitions and can confidently say you understand what they mean? For these terms, a few. How many over half? Okay, we got a pretty good room. If I had more time, I'd put you on the spot. Give me some definitions. Right, there are so many different types of machine learning. Now, the way that AI has been defined by laws and institutions is incredibly important, because how do we know what we're governing if we don't have a clear definition of what it is we're looking at? And we can see the definition actually changing over the years as the technology changed. So let's look at the first definition from the National AI Intelligence Act of 2020. It says a machine-based system that can, for a given set of, what does it say? Human-defined, and it's the afternoon, we're tired, but we get that energy. Human-defined objectives make predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. Okay, now we see the OECD in 2023, and the definition changes a bit. Can you tell me where it changes? Go ahead.
It takes the human out of it.
It takes the human out of it, because now we have models like reinforcement learning, where they're learning from themselves. They've taken the human out of it. Now, in the state of California, we recently passed a bill into law that set our own definition, where it's an engineered or machine-based system that varies in its level of autonomy, and that can, for explicit or implicit objectives, infer from the input or receives how to generate outputs that can influence physical or virtual environments. Is that crystal clear to everybody? Right, what does that even mean in practice? I mean, I think it's a pretty good definition, and we'll give some examples here in a minute. But essentially, governments are pretty hyped up about AI right now, right? I work a lot with the public sector. I've worked with the state of California, the state of Washington. I worked for USAID when USAID was a thing. Unfortunately, USAID's not around anymore. But government institutions are really excited about the promise of AI. And they're really excited about it because the public sector is understaffed, underfinanced, and completely overwhelmed. And so there are ways that we can use AI to improve government efficiency and effectiveness. You can do process automation, automating those repetitive tasks, freeing up personnel to do more nuanced activities. Using data-driven decision-making, right? There are people in this room who have led open data movements. And you can use data-driven decision-making to make your operations more efficient, effective, and equitable. How many of you just absolutely adore going to the DMV? Not a soul, right? It's a soulless place. No one wants to be there. But look, how can we use machine learning algorithms to make us be able to go through that process in a less stressful way? Another is around fraud detection, an issue that plagues all state governments, and risk mitigation. But there's also this promise that use of AI can improve the equity of government. You can personalize your services, translate into languages for all of your constituents. You can improve access, reduce bias, identify the bias, and enhance transparency and accountability. I often hear people complaining about how machine learning or AI perpetuates or causes bias. And I would say that's a feature, not a bug. Yes, it's terrible that it does that, but as long as we can see it, identify it, and correct for it to the greatest extent possible, then to me that's a benefit. Otherwise, without that, without the data trail or the record that the model is making a biased decision, you might have implicit biases that continue unchecked for decades. Now, everybody really wants AI in the public sector, and I can see the governors are all really, reaching out to their state departments and agencies. You need to get AI, and you need to get AI. We need to implement this as soon as possible. But if it's not done correctly, it causes significant liability issues for the state. Financial liability, reputational liability, legal liability. How many of you know this example from Michigan, the Midas example? A few. So this is a really heartbreaking example. Michigan deployed a tool called Midas, and it was to identify fraudulent unemployment claims across the state. Like I said before, every state deals with these issues. And Midas, this tool, was going to automatically identify those who were likely committing unemployment fraud, automatically cease payment to them, and then automatically request repayment or garnish their wages. Well, it found that it had a false positive of over 34,000 people. And this wasn't found out for quite some time, and it happened in perfect timing right before the holiday season. And so these 34,000 people, false positive, they lose their income, their money's being garnished. Who do they turn to? Right, it's the government. And they're, private sector does you wrong, you feel like, oh, I can push back, I can go to government to have help, but when the government does it to you, it'd be a lot more difficult to figure out where to go. Who do you turn to? The state of Washington had a very unfortunate issue where these Washington State Lottery thought, ooh, generative AI is a really cool, fun tool. Maybe to increase the number of lottery ticket sales, we could have people sort of envision through a generative AI tool where they would go on vacation after they got their big pot of money. Well, unfortunately, that tool created a not safe for work image of somebody. Another challenge here was that the state of Washington, to protect people's privacy, did not store those images. So they have no idea how it was created, if it was created with their tool, and just the reliance on third parties about whether or not this actually happened. But the fact that they didn't have a process in place to red team it and make sure that it wouldn't create these not safe for work images before deployment, I think is a very serious concern. But again, there's always this FOMO that I'm seeing, this fear of missing out, that everybody's thinking, how do I best deploy or utilize AI? And I would say oftentimes AI is not needed, or machine learning. I also personally don't love the term artificial intelligence. I think it's a way too hyped term, and instead we should be saying machine learning or statistically, significantly advanced pattern recognition. That is sexy, right? I don't think a lot of VCs want to invest in that long phrase of words, but it's so much hyped up that people really want to adopt it because of this fear of missing out. So I'm actually seeing a lot of state governments really jump to services. Right? They're trying to look at how do we deploy and implement AI without considering the values of our organization and our mission and our requirement to serve the public interest. Does that align with our strategy for actually harnessing and bringing in this technology within our services? I would say over the past year or two, there has been more of an emphasis on ensuring that their values are translated into an appropriate strategy. Some of that coming from those executive orders at the state level within Washington and California, and I'll get into more details on that in a minute. But we're seeing more of this operationalization of values through a responsible AI governance strategy and through procurement. So what is AI governance? Well, it can be defined as the methods, procedures, and rules that shape how AI or machine learning systems are designed, developed, deployed, and monitored. And it encompasses ethical, legal, and technical considerations. Now, responsible AI principles are not new. AI governance isn't new. It's been around over a decade. We've been thinking about machine learning algorithms in high-risk settings for a very long time. And responsible AI principles emerged from both the public and private sector and intergovernmental organizations. Over time, we've sort of started to reach a consensus on responsible AI principles, which you can see the 6 listed here. Is it appropriate? Which I believe is the number one. That's the most important. Do we really need to use machine learning for this? Is it appropriate? Are we encoding ethical and social responsibility? Is it non-discriminatory to the extent possible? We'll also point out that NIST issued a report a few years ago about the types of bias that plague AI systems. And in that report, they outlined, I think it's 3 or 4 main types of bias: implicit human bias, systemic bias, statistical bias. There might be another. But compellingly, they argue that by addressing one type of bias, you will very likely inadvertently cause another to appear. So it's more about managing rather than completely eliminating any type of bias. Is it transparent to the extent possible and accountable? Sustainability issues are definitely coming more to the fore as these large models take incredible amounts of energy and water for them to be developed, and safety and security. So I mentioned the intergovernmental and international initiatives. These entities are really trying to establish some form of consensus on what does responsible AI governance look like, and how might we best ensure that countries will adhere to that. Right? It creates an enabling environment for companies as well. It's not only just about upholding the values and the rights of their constituents, their residents, their citizens, but also about how do we best ensure that we're creating this enabling environment for responsible AI development and deployment. There are many, 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 many federal and state AI legislation database and trackers. I've included a few of my favorites here. The first one, CHI, which is a Berkeley initiative, the Center for Human Compatible AI. They have an AI policy database. Also IAPP, which is a privacy entity, they're also maintaining a database. There is a lot of overlap between data privacy and AI technologies, given that they are often using person identifiable information or being used in areas that can infer or release some of that information. And also Tech Policy Press. How many of you have read any articles on Tech Policy Press? A few? Good. I'm loving this. The number keeps going up and up and up. The more times I ask people this question. I really like Tech Policy Press. I think they've really got their thumb on what's happening in this space, and you can find some really great insights there. So, as Colleen earlier, you had said the federal government is redlining some of the federal AI strategies. This is the image that comes to my mind of what's happening to the efforts that were underway under the Biden administration. We're seeing a lot of it being overturned and changed. So now what's going to happen? Yes?
Just one comment. So I actually work for a large federal agency, but I'm here on my own personal basis. One of the challenges that we have, at least within the agency that we see, is AI just another piece of software, right? Is AI just another IT system? Because from an agency perspective, they've been deploying IT systems for donkey's years, right? And they have risk mitigations, risk controls, all of the above. And when you treat AI as a silo, when you treat AI as an adjunct, then you put an excessive burden on the system because it's treated as a special entity. So the struggle we have is how do we ensure that AI is nuanced in the existing IT practices, existing IT controls, so we don't have an excessive amount of oversight and governance on top of it. So that's the tension that we have, and I think some of the changes that I think this lady mentioned about the new OMB memo is probably a manifestation of some of that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and also to say, under the first Trump administration, they made really great strides. I think in responsible AI governance, I had updated my slides, but I don't think it was reflected here, but it will be in the one I give out. I wrote a piece for Tech Policy Press on what AI governance will look like under Trump 2.0, and I get at this issue as well. All of the guidance and work that I've done with the state of California and the state of Washington is purely do not create some bespoke process just for AI. You already have security checks, data privacy checks, resiliency checks. Does it work? Is it accurate? So it's just building into the established process. I firmly believe there shouldn't be just a whole new review process just for AI. There might be some additional review that needs to happen, especially if you're applying an AI system in a high-risk area. But to me, the hype has completely kind of overblown the fact that we have established processes that we can leverage. So that's always what I argue for, and we are seeing that at the state level. Even though at the state level, the 2 executive orders were specifically focused on generative AI, if you look at their outputs, they mention other forms of AI. So their mandate was around generative AI, but they ensured that the processes they were putting in place were essentially for all forms of machine learning or automated decision systems. Okay, so as the federal level is uncertain, we have been seeing over the past few years states pushing forward bills that have been signed into law or bills that weren't signed into law specifically focused on AI. We've also seen sets of bills and laws sort of on the periphery that touch on AI issues, like Illinois' BIPA, the Biometric Information Privacy Act, and others. So some of the common themes we're seeing for state AI governance strategies, this uptick in data and privacy laws that address automated decision systems. Several states have put in place laws. Big concern around AI in elections. We've had a few very high-profile elections, and the risk of deepfakes affecting those elections. In the state of California, we do have laws on the books on that. Whether or not those will be effective in practice, we'll see. There has been a push to form more advisory boards, councils, task forces at the state level, especially around how might we be able to harness AI-enabled systems to benefit our departments, make us more efficient, effective, and equitable. As was mentioned also by Colleen, the banning biometrics and facial recognition, that being a priority one. There's issues across many states about whether or not this is appropriate. Increasing concerns, of course, around workforce development and equipping the next generation of learners. In the state of California, we passed a bill into law that is going to revamp education through K through 12 to ensure that our students are getting training in AI as they then enter higher education and in the workforce. And concerns around non-discrimination and auditing. So legal obligations to make sure you are not causing harm. So let's dig a little bit deeper into California's AI governance strategy. Last year there were about 135 bills considered. This is a pretty big number, right? AI was really at the forefront of everybody's minds with it, splashing across headlines, robots replacing workers, the death of copyright and creativity. There's a lot of concerns among members of the legislature that their constituents really wanted them to do something to ensure that AI was not going to harm our economy and our society. The 2 bills I've marked in red were vetoed. They did make it all the way to Governor Newsom's desk, but were vetoed. Now, the one that I want to call out is SB 1047. So SB 1047 was a very controversial bill in the state of California. It was going to require developers of these significantly advanced frontier models. In the first version, it said you must give assurance that risks are mitigated before the model is trained. But guess what? That's really difficult to do in practice because you don't know the capabilities of a model until it goes on a months-long training run. So then they changed it to pre-deployment. So after the model has been trained, putting in risk mitigation before it's actually deployed on the market. The bill was vetoed by Governor Newsom, and that was because he received a letter from high-ranking Democratic members of Congress saying at the time, this is before the election, that this is a federal issue, the federal government should be overseeing this. Also, you're way too focused on future existential risks. Much more focus needs to be placed on the risks of AI right now. And that bill was vetoed. If Governor Newsom could have predicted where we are today, I don't know if he would have vetoed it. But I guarantee you, the author of that bill will very likely reintroduce a similar bill this session. And if they do, it will have tremendous impact. Now, oftentimes when I say that, people say, oh, the companies, so they'll just move to another state. They'll leave. And I would say it doesn't really matter where they are, because California is still one of the largest economies in the world, and they're gonna wanna sell their product to Californians. So just like the Brussels effect of the European Union pushing their market power, California can do the same thing. It doesn't matter where the companies are. Some relevant bills that have come forward. I'll call out one that I think was very well intended and also mimics many other states. The state of Texas also had a similar law, the California anti-deepfake law. I published a piece in Wired in 2023, I think around that time, maybe a little bit before. Now, the anti-deepfake law made it a criminal offense to purposefully distribute a malicious deepfake intending to influence an election. I think it was 60 days before an election or 90 days. But very unenforceable. Because by the time that deepfake gets out, what if it was released the night before the election and it goes viral? It gets picked up by media outlets. Now everybody's saying, well, I'm not gonna vote. I'm not gonna vote for this candidate. So as a result of that, we have seen new bills introduced that are better equipped to deal with some of those issues, but still imperfect. So one is on watermarking AI-generated content. So how may we ensure that any AI-generated content has some cryptographic hash or watermark on it that then anytime it's uploaded or shared, we can have a detector that says, oh, that's AI-generated. No value judgment on what it is, just a communication to the public that it's AI-generated. And there are some feasibility issues with that technically, but I think over the next few years, we'll be able to actually implement that. Yeah?
Wasn't that also in the 2018 campaign as well? The bot disclosure.
Yes, bot disclosure. A bot disclosure is not about watermarking. The Bot Disclosure Act says that if you're engaging in a commercial transaction or any influence on an election, you have to communicate that you're a bot. Which, why would they? They don't. But it's also the same with the anti-deepfake law, is that if you were distributing malicious deepfake, you had to identify yourself as the creator. Who would do that? Nobody. And you can hide your identity and then just spread it out through bots. But hopefully some of this idea around watermarking in public, another bill is around public detectors of AI-generated content. So equipping the public with the ability to look at something and have it be verified whether or not it's AI-generated or not. Okay, I think let's go to the next. Now, I've been talking a lot about the California Executive Order on Generative AI, which was issued December of 2023. And this compelled state agencies and departments to identify ways that they might be able to harness AI-enabled technologies within their services. But it also required them to develop guidance on public sector generative AI procurement. Now, procurement really is the stick that you can force third parties, especially the private sector, to comply with some of your requests. The state of California is a large procurer of software, spends billions of dollars. So if there's consensus across the state that these are some of the requirements for you to be able to get into a contract with the state of California, that can force the hand. Also, I keep calling out Colleen, I was impressed. Also, Colleen, where you said procurement as policy, which is also, I think, another component here. They also issued, from the state of California, the Generative AI Guidelines for public sector procurement uses and training. I understand the title says Generative AI. However, if you go and read it, you can see that there are some little slips in there of other forms of machine learning. So luckily, the California Department of Technology, GovOps, and others, they get it. We shouldn't just be building a process only for generative AI tools, especially as the technology changes, and it's changing so rapidly. And there is something else on the horizon. Now, of course, there's the word of these, laws, regulations, and guidelines, and it would seem, okay, good, we'll just implement that, right? We'll go from the word to what's actually happening in reality. But it's definitely not that easy, right? You're mostly all lawyers. Your job is also interpretation, right? So what the law says and how do we implement this, how do we show compliance? And right now, I would say it's extremely messy in this space. So what can we do? Now, some of the strategies at the state level, they've been looking at the federal level, where we had NIST, which does not have regulatory authority, right? So NIST is a federal agency that cannot compel or require a company to implement its NIST AI risk management framework. It can provide guidance and best practices. Within a governance strategy, what I believe is most important are standards. So standard setting bodies like the International Standards Organization or IEEE, them setting socio-technical standards of how do we put in place appropriate technical and governance guardrails to better ensure we're designing and deploying AI to benefit society. That to me is step one. Next, we can see this burgeoning area of certifications. And this is gonna be a big, big thing for the public sector. Because if the public sector is procuring AI technology, they don't have the capability to audit every single tool. So what we're seeing is a cottage industry bubbling up of third-party auditors, certifiers, licensors. But how do we know they're doing a good enough job when they themselves aren't audited or set to a standard? So we're sort of in this moment right now of chicken and egg. Some standards are being developed, but how to operationalize those standards and how to ensure that that third party that's auditing or certifying is adhering to that standard, then that will finally build trust for the public sector to be able to procure technology that has been certified by a trustworthy certifier. We can also see a transition from these frameworks of responsible AI governance to actual structures. As I mentioned before, we're seeing the development of advisory councils, internal and external review boards, like safety review boards. Do we need to be using this technology? Is it fit for purpose? Have we put in place appropriate evaluation and continuous monitoring? I believe nearly every state, if not all states, have an AI community of practice where they're exploring ways to procure the technology in a responsible way. But then we can also transition over to the tools. So actually implementing impact and risk assessments, implementing or requiring our third-party vendors to make model cards and data sheets available. Model cards give the capabilities of a model, how it was trained, the types of data it used, where it might be inappropriate to apply that model, and then also data sheets that gives a description of the data. It sounds exactly, as it sounds. What type of data was used, where was the data collected, where might be some shortcomings in the data. It just gives you a better understanding of what you're dealing with. But then also, like I said before, some of the tools that are most effective are really around the contracts, in terms of those contracts, and ensuring that the private sector is making information available to the public sector.
Sorry, do you see a role, at least in the world that I live in, do you see a role for AI practitioners within the public sector, or AI program managers within the public sector, AI governance leads within the public sector, to have some sort of a formal training certification? Because we have such a disparity of skill sets and maturity. Since you don't have common skill sets and common maturity, then you need layers of governance and oversight to ensure that there's goodness in their output. So do you see a role for some sort of a formal training, formal certification of people?
Yes, absolutely. And at the federal level, we have the National AI Training Act, which was signed into law, which requires federal departments and agencies engaging with AI to train up their personnel. Both executive orders for the state of Washington and state of California also required training. And also in California, the procurement guidelines there's a provision in there that says that there has to be training. They even outline the different types of training that are needed. Yes.
So I'm not sure
I think
if it fits.
Mike, so that people online can hear.
So I'm not sure if it fits in your third column of tools.
Mhm.
What I see missing is the penalties. Because nowadays, when we had the physical world, not the software world,
Mhm.
you had product liability, you had strict liability. Now we all suffer from the Theranos black box because people don't understand what's in the software black box. There's no penalties, and at most, it's just restitution and not punitive. I read a lot of these bills, California bills, and some of them I could swear that they write it in a faulty way on purpose, so people like me who want those regulations in place, they actually say, no, that's a bad bill because it's too ambiguous and it could stop other things that it should not. So I see that there's a big problem because we are deferring quite a bit to the private sector, but we're not deferring to natural, citizens, residents, and human beings. They have no rights. Most of these bills, you have no private right of action. And to the extent that the government and private sector are, I won't say but they're collaborating together, then there's no recourse. That is a big thing that is missing, the punitive tool for these companies if they don't do the right thing. Because what happened to the concept of product liability?
Yeah, I actually talk a lot about product liability tort. I'm not a lawyer, but I did publish a piece in Wired about how we can use product liability tort to hold platforms and AI companies accountable. What we need though is harm to occur, right? So that you can demonstrate harm occurred and that they were negligent in their design of the tool and that it caused harm. But that means harm has to occur.
But that
Yeah.
gentleman who was, because of the surveillance, was incorrectly identified, that's harm. But then, or if Clearview, for example, is taking the private people's images,
Yeah.
it shouldn't just write it. That penalty, the punitive penalty should be included. That's because there's plenty of harm out there, examples.
It's good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
You mentioned that standards you think should be step one in this. But the standards bodies, when they produce standards, they make money through selling the top standards that are proprietary and copyrighted. And they also don't contain almost anyone who is an expert on any issues of, say, fundamental rights or equity, access to justice, or the things that often are going to be very important when we consider AI compared to, say, standardizing a plug or an electrical current or so on. And there's also a lot of controversy about when standards are woven into law and accessing them. And I just don't know how you square those concerns when we think about the kind of issues that you've raised around.
I'm happy you brought this up. Actually, it's right there. Yes, I'm happy you brought this up because that was one of my biggest criticisms and why I said that they need to be socio-technical in their approach. It cannot just be a technical standard because AI is a socio-technical tool and it has human rights considerations. I've also published a piece on human rights impact assessments and whether or not those combined with risk and impact assessments is something where then we can get more at these socio-technical issues. But at the federal level, I was very happy to see that Senator Hickenlooper, a Democrat from Colorado, introduced this VET AI Act, Validation and Evaluation for Trustworthy AI. As you've probably heard a billion times today, NIST is, their mission was trustworthy AI and operationalizing that in practice. So Senator Hickenlooper said, look, if we're having these third-party auditors, we're having standards being developed, how do we assess those? And the bill would have charged NIST with developing guidance on what do those socio-technical risks look like and how can we ensure standards are keeping up with those risks.
And do you think ISO should produce a standard at all, given that they would be seeking to make proprietary standards compared to, say, the NIST approach, which the public body?
I would prefer NIST, but also, But also you have to think about the weight of the organization. ISO, IEEE, Senelec. I'm pretty sure I have another slide that has the other standards bodies. Some of them, somewhere. But yeah, it's difficult. But also we need coordination across them. Like we can't have Senelec working completely in isolation because they're influencing the EU AI Act and their standards without discussing with the other standards bodies that we know are playing in that.
The problem you get there is when they use parts from the other standards bodies
I totally agree with you, totally. I feel like I saw another hand. Okay. Okay, let me. Okay, so to get to my main point today too is that if we're thinking about, and we're definitely seeing this at the state level, where there's this jump to identify ways that we can use AI, especially generative AI, regardless of whether or not it's needed, to jump to those services without putting in place a strategy that encapsulates and operationalizes the values of the public sector. And so some examples that I've worked on with the state of California and state of Washington is translation of those principles to practices, right? You, like I said before, the de jure versus de facto, you know, what's written versus what's actually happening in practice can be quite different. So here are just a few examples that have been implemented. Number one, even the University of California, we were the first public institution of higher education to establish our own responsible AI governance strategy and process. Because we knew, look, we ourselves were designing and deploying AI systems in our own service provision. Let's make sure we're doing that in alignment with the values of our organization. Our very first principle, appropriateness. Do we even need to use a machine learning algorithm or any other form of AI for this purpose? Including human in the loop for ethical and social responsibility, ensuring that there's some mechanism for oversight, a cross-check, that you are not deploying a system like they did in Michigan, the MIDAS system, where it's just deployed with no oversight and you have 36,000 false positives. And you can see the others. Now, at the state level, we are definitely seeing NIST in its AI risk management framework being adopted in legislation in Colorado. The Colorado AI Act requires implementation starting in, I think, January 2026 is when it will go into effect. But essentially, it calls out that developers of these high-risk systems should be using the NIST AI risk management framework. So even though NIST does not have regulatory authority, cannot require a company to do so. If you have a bill that says you need to do the NIST AI RMF, they're doing it in order to operate within that state. Of course, we're seeing a lot of sandboxes, right? So state governments actually deploying AI systems in closed environments so they can watch and see is this performing as expected, is it robust to additional data being entered, is it secure, is it safe, accountable, etc. And then also around algorithmic auditing, like I mentioned before, this is something I am very concerned about, whether or not we can trust these third-party auditors and licensors, especially as the space right now is quite unsteady on what and how we should be doing these risk assessments. So I wanted to actually show the NIST AI RMF. How many of you have seen the NIST AI RMF playbook? A few, it's a good amount of hands. I think it's a pretty helpful resource, right? So you can go through the NIST AI RMF playbook, you can look at, there are 4 different areas of govern, map, measure, and manage risk. They have questions on here to help. But one of the biggest things for them, and sorry you don't have my updated deck, but I will, it's in the deck that you'll get. We published a profile for the NIST AI RMF for frontier models, so significantly advanced models, going through each component of the 4 main components. So there are many subcomponents of the govern, map, measure, and manage. Actually operationalizing how might you do this in practice. Talk about standards, I already talked about the BAG Act, getting forward with that. I have made available to you this worksheet. It is helpful, I think, for just having some creative thinking about what you would do. There are 2 hypothetical cases. Both of them are focused on use of AI in the public sector. You can look at the principles, which we've already gone over, and there's different roles that people can take on. So pretending you're a procurement officer taking on the role of legal counsel, you're the actual developer of this tool, or you're a community member. And then really thinking about the strategies that you can implement based off of the benefits and risks. And it's available for download. put my contact information here, and I would hope for us to engage in more discussion. We have about 13 minutes, I believe. Oh, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. Given the state that AI laws and governance tools have started appearing in a sort of state-by-state, need-by-need basis, kind of, do you think that AI, the United States AI framework is going to be looking sort of like the actual privacy legal framework does, where it's a sectoral approach, where each state is also doing implementing regulation as needed, and the federal government is also really doing it kind of in as much as it's needed in a specific industry. Do you see it going that way?
Yeah, more of like a patchwork approach. In a way, yes, but I think that some states often look to other states. Like I mentioned, I work with the state of California and the state of Washington. Those states are in communication a lot with each other. Both of them host very large tech companies, and I think for them, they have a shared vision of where they want to be, and they're more prone to working together. Now, whether or not other states that might be very misaligned on their political beliefs, and especially about the role of oversight of the private sector, they might be less likely to follow. So we might see a shift of red versus blue states in their strategy. Yeah, I think we will see a patchwork for a while, especially if we don't have comprehensive law at the federal level. Take the mic so they can hear you online.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I was wondering if you could speak about the stakeholder groups and coalitions that you're seeing emerge. I think 1047, but then also some of the other work you've been doing with the state. If it's kind of the same actors on any AI issue, or it's very bespoke to each particular initiative, and then just how they're aligning. And if you could also talk about the intra-industry differences, right, with like Anthropic on one side versus OpenAI or another.
Oh, that's such a good question. So, I mean, you have your regular players that we always see, like certain nonprofit civil society organizations, for example, like Electronic Frontier Foundation. They're probably going to take on a privacy issue around AI, right? We'll see others that have more of a technical lean, like the Future of Life Institute's going to be more concerned about artificial general intelligence in the future, and they'll take on that issue. And then there's some more coalitions that are sort of cross-cutting. But yes, we definitely see, I think, within the subject areas, and then the role of industry and what they're doing, and also how industry has shifted over time, right? OpenAI was open, right? That was the goal at the beginning, was to make open models, and I think that there was some dollar signs in people's eyes there about, oh, we could actually really monetize this and build it out in a different way and not make it open, and they shifted and changed their approach. I do think in the face of potential federal legislation that it can become a competitive advantage to be a responsible AI player, right? It'll lower financial, legal, reputational liability. It's hard to predict what some of these CEOs are going to be doing any day.
So you didn't say anything about Colorado, and Colorado's approach to regulating AI is different from California so far. So I wondered if you can comment on that, and also comment on the governor's expression of some skepticism about that law.
About Colorado's.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have as much expertise in Colorado, but I believe tomorrow on our panel, there are people there who have more expertise, but as I understand it, it's doing risk assessments of high-risk AI systems within Colorado before they can be used, and procurement oversight guidance. But I am not as well-versed in Colorado. I'm definitely West Coast,
So
over Washington.
is Connecticut also doing something? I thought I saw something about.
I feel like they did just pass a law recently. And then there's been other initiatives like in New York with AI and HR and an advisory committee. So yeah, we are seeing these states sort of popping up their own laws in those different areas, whether it's a comprehensive law like Colorado or in a specific domain.
Thank you. Since you brought up the OpenAI conversion fact, I was wondering what you think about the Department of Justice's work into kind of challenging that conversion, looking at protecting the charitable assets of OpenAI. Like, do you consider that a form of governance, and where is that going? If you care to venture some.
Where is it going now?
Yeah.
Nowhere. I don't know. At the federal level, I don't think it's going to be taken up as much. But I agree that raising the red flag on the actions was merited. Yeah. But also, I'm not a lawyer. So. Any other questions? Actually, wait, let me just look really quickly online. I should see if anybody has a question. Okay, we heard on a prior panel today that removing unwanted elements from machine learning model is not feasible. So therefore, removing bias seems to be not feasible. I would disagree. It's not removing bias. It's always managing bias. It's also why NIST changed their terminology to govern, map, measure, manage. Not mitigate, not remove, manage. And it's all about identifying what types of biases are important for the use case application and addressing, being transparent about how you're addressing that concern. You know, are you correcting for it by adding synthetic data, which was also discussed earlier today, to make sure that a portion of your data set is not underrepresentative of a certain protected class. So there are these methodologies that can be used. And also the controls, as you heard earlier today, on outputs, right? Ensuring that it's not going to output discriminatory information.
Hi, thank you. This is a great presentation. I was just curious what you think we're going to see in terms of vetoes this year from the governor. And you know, he vetoed one and signed 17 AI bills last year. Is there? It seems like the legislature is consistently bolder than the governor in terms of what they want to approve and vote on. Do you think he would veto more stuff if he got more pressure, or do you think he feels like 1 out of 17 is a good veto ratio?
Oh, I don't know about that, but I think this is my personal belief. I don't necessarily think that Governor Newsom imagined that both sides of Congress would be Republican majority. And so I do think that there might be less likelihood of a veto. However, I will say that I personally disagreed with elements of SB 1047, where I thought it was not actually going to achieve its goal. So I was fine with this version being vetoed, knowing that a new version will come forward. But I guarantee you we are going to see some very big bills introduced on AI, I think with a lot of teeth. And your guess is as good as mine. Whether or not Newsom will sign a veto.
As a complete non-Californian, looking from afar, we seem to see that when some is threatened to be put onto a ballot initiative, you can have quite interesting legal shenanigans that can occur. Has there been movement on people discussing AI ballot initiatives, and what would you think the temperature of those might be in this state?
I mean, it's a great question, right? In California, we have direct democracy, so you can have a proposition where you get enough signatures, it gets on the ballot. That's how the California Consumer Privacy Act came into play. We'll see. It's going to take a steward, though, right? It's going to take somebody to lead that and get the signatures, raise the awareness. And then there's implementation.
Which I think is more or less what happened in the NCPC going on.
Yeah, so we'll see. Yeah, you're saying for the people online so you can hear that special interest might flood as well. These topics. Yes, yeah, like Prop 22 and the gig economy, and whether or not they should be employees or contractors. Yeah. All right. Thank you all so much.